These are my pictures that are on the wall. This is the color of my rug. I know that I'm awake.
I was probably conscious for 5 seconds before they put me out.
And I turn my head and I see these 4, I'm going to call them beings.
I saw beings through my bedroom window staring at me with huge dark eyes.
And the one on the far right, he had some type of a small wand in his waist belt.
The one closest to me had this rod-like device.
I hoped there was something wrong. And I went through a lot of testing and things to find out whether something was wrong.
And like this, they got me.
Madness is not like that. Dreams are not like that. Fantasy is not like that.
I felt like I was possessed by the most beautiful spirit.
I have a hard time with this.
Why?
Because I don't want to believe it.
For those who are interested in UFOs, we've long wondered what the cover-up is really about. What does the government know that the public can't handle? Today we hear a host of different explanations. One is that the United States wants to maintain dominance over its adversaries and would never reveal such technology publicly. We've also heard that the US government wouldn't reveal a lot of its footage and data without compromising sources and methods. And finally, we hear it's for financial reasons, that whoever gets the patents for this technology would be rich for all time, and perhaps the government hasn't been fair to all corporations, but a select few. But in the last 7 years or so, we've had credible witnesses testify to the authenticity of all the reasons above, and yet the public is not freaking out as was predicted by the Robertson panel or similar efforts during the George W. Bush administration. Many people don't accept these explanations as a justification for a century-long cover-up. Many speculate that there are deeper, more disturbing reasons behind it. There's still a mountain of evidence, footage, data that the government has and will not release to the public. What is it about this information that, if it all came out now, would cause catastrophic disclosure? You may remember that in the last episode of the NHI Files, we left off with a quote from Dr. John Blitch during his interview with Ross Coulthart.
Imagine you're Harry Truman, 1947, pieces broken out all over, and you get brought, or you are shown, wreckage of egg-shaped craft, discs, avocado-shaped craft, and bodies inside them that are clearly not human. And mixed in with that are human body parts. What are you going to do?
This specific interview piqued my interest so much because I've been interested in UFOs nearly my entire life, and I've never heard so many different pieces of information being connected together in such a coherent way. And that's what I feel a lot of us are looking for. We're looking for a way to understand this very complicated cover-up. If you wanted to understand a bigger picture of the cover-up, you could ask an elite pilot who's seen a UAP, but they don't know the fuller picture. All they know is what they've seen, and they can corroborate with their fellow pilots. You could ask someone like David Grush, but he's limited to what he can say to the public. You could even ask a member of a crash retrieval program like Jake Barber, but even then, these programs are allegedly so compartmentalized that even these people might not know the full picture. So how do we get this information? I would argue that maybe you would ask someone who's not been part of a UAP program, but has been part of elite military units, has been put in extremely high positions of trust, and knows the psychology of the people in the military-industrial complex. That would be something interesting to hear. That's exactly who Dr. John Blitch is. He's a former Pershing II missile battery commander, so that's nuclear missiles. He's a former Delta Force member, DARPA program manager, former Air Force research lab scientist. He also holds a doctorate in cognitive psychology and neuroscience. This is the type of guy that might be able to connect the dots together.
The abduction phenomenon is at the core of the fear that our government is rightfully trying to prevent.
So Dr. Blitch may not be a first-hand witness to one of these UAP programs, but he does know the background and the psychology behind the people who would have set up this UFO secrecy. Even more importantly, Dr. Blitch himself is an abductee or contact experiencer. In interviews, he details terrifying encounters with non-human beings throughout his life. So could he be right? Could one of the biggest reasons for secrecy around UFOs have a direct connection to abductions? If so, then the world needs to buckle up and rethink how we've treated abductees or contact experiencers. For decades, we've kept alien abductions on the fringiest part of the fringe. The media still portrays them with hyperbole, parody, and even whistleblowers from the modern disclosure area seem to want to steer clear from this subject for now. So to fix this and to better understand the abduction phenomenon, and of course satisfy the skeptics who are still iffy on the reality of abductions, I interviewed Dr. John Blitch himself, certified hypnotherapist Yvonne Smith, and Kathleen Marden, UFO researcher, author, and the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. So I'm going to start out by using these guests to directly address some of the criticisms that have been aimed at abductions over the years. The first claim is that abductees are crazy, and we can simply refute this by once again introducing our guest, Dr. John Blitch, who from a young age has talked about terrifying experiences ranging from seeing beings peeking at him through his window to one episode as an adult where a 7-foot-tall praying mantis was conveying messages to him telepathically.
And I've got to tell you, JP, part of the reason why I've never related the mantis part of that mountain bike story to anybody before is that I didn't believe it.
The mantis beings are the ones who are most feared. They take a lot of people, and particularly military people who tend to be pugilistic, and police officers as well. And the mantis people tell the humans that we are all one. We're of one consciousness. We're related, that kind of thing. And they say it doesn't matter what kind of body or what kind of container we're in. We all have a consciousness. We all have a soul. And so we may look different, but we're all the same.
And that may sound crazy to you, but we need to remind the viewer that Dr. John Blitch was part of Delta Force, which is the Army's Tier 1 Special Operations Group. And on top of that, he was in charge of nuclear weapons. So you have to ask yourself, if all abductees are crazy, then how does a lifelong abductee make it through these programs? The second claim is that abductees are just experiencing sleep paralysis. But again, this can be refuted because there are several credible cases that involve military members that have lasted for hours. And Dr. Blitch himself had an experience that lasted 5 hours during what was supposed to be a relatively easy mountain bike ride.
And so the sleep paralysis thing doesn't explain why I turned around on that mountain bike and felt drawn like a moth to the flame, like an obsession to jump that fence, which is beyond anomalous.
The third claim comes from a neuroscientist, Michael A. Persinger, and he claimed that he was able to simulate the abduction experience in a lab, and therefore that was sufficient evidence to debunk the whole abduction experience. But I asked Dr. Blitch about this, and this was his response.
You are not legally or professionally or morally allowed to induce trauma in a laboratory. So this notion that you can simulate this horrific experience, that's off the table. If you are doing that, you ought to be in jail because you're essentially raping somebody while studying rape.
Another claim that critics like to throw around is that when these abductees eventually get to a hypnotherapist to figure out what happened to them, that these hypnotherapists are asking them leading questions and bringing them down this specific avenue that would make them believe that their experience was an alien abduction by asking them, oh, what did this UFO look like? And what did the room look like? Tell me what the aliens looked like. But I actually asked certified hypnotherapist Yvonne Smith about this.
So then I tell them, okay, describe your surroundings. If you're not, describe your surroundings. So I use the words, if they're saying I'm in a large room, and I'll say, okay, describe the large room. So you don't suggest, are you in a large room now? That sort of thing.
Here comes the big gray alien, and what does he say? You're not doing that.
I know I've heard nightmares over the years that some people had said they were very they were led and they weren't comfortable with it. Not often. I don't hear this often, but I've heard it. And that's why that was way before I started teaching my classes. But you use back, as I mentioned, the same wording that they tell you.
Many of these claims are based on the false idea that these abductees want to believe that what happened to them is an alien abduction. Many of them don't.
I can't tell you how difficult it is to get people to go on television to talk about this. People are not interested in being before the public. They're very ashamed because they get ridiculed, humiliated about it. This is not something anybody does. This is not a club anybody wants to belong to. This is not something people do because they want to be filmed or get on publicity. It's very difficult to get people to come forth and acknowledge they've had these experiences.
Yes. The advantage I have as a hypnotherapist is that usually I'm the last kid on the block they come see. They've been in therapy years. They've been given medication for years. And it's just really a Band-Aid with this because there's still that area that is traumatizing them and their therapist can't tap into this.
And just to throw this in the mix, many contact experiencers, including John Blitch, can recall their experiences without hypnotherapy. The last claim I'll touch on is that people claim that none of these contact experiencers would give the details that they have without being influenced by the media.
If it weren't for movies, none of this crap would exist. All of this crap comes out of movies. It's Hollywood. Hollywood has fueled our obsession with UFOs and alien life, and I really believe that.
But again, these claims come from people who haven't looked into the real research, because there was a study done by Don Donderi and Bud Hopkins, and they separated 3 groups of people to answer a personality questionnaire, which didn't have questions directly to do with abductions, but rather tried to ask questions that would characterize the cognitive and psychological traits of an abductee. The first group were people claiming to be abductees who filled out the questionnaire. The second group were people not claiming to be abductees and were not told about the full spectrum of the study. The third group were supposed to be simulators, and they were asked to pretend to be abductees and fill out the questionnaire based off of their cultural knowledge of abductions through the media. And what they found was fascinating, that when they put the results into a graph, there was hardly any overlap between the 3 groups of people, showing how real abductees' details varied wildly from what the media showed. I'm trying to point out that many of the claims that people believe are sufficient to debunk the abduction experience are flippant at best, and they come from researchers who believe that the abduction experience can't be true. It doesn't come from an unbiased scientific standpoint.
None of the scientific literature that claims to refute this, none of it addresses the nuts and bolts abundance of physical anomalous effects that go along with these experiences.
The same old disinformants come back from time to time with the same old false information and attempt to convince a new generation that it really didn't happen, and that Betty and Barney weren't the people that they really were, that they were, some kind of kooks or something like that, and that they only saw a light in the sky, and on, when, the facts, if you just look at the factual content of the early reports, you'll realize that those people are lying their rear ends off.
Luckily, some of the serious researchers who came to alien abductions thinking that they couldn't be true later changed their minds when they were seeing the evidence. And that's when we get to the legendary John Mack. He was a Harvard psychiatrist and he was a Pulitzer Prize winner. And he came to this topic thinking that some sort of psychiatric disorder could be found. But when a prosaic explanation couldn't be found for many of these cases, he had struggles of his own, which he detailed in several of the books he wrote on the abduction phenomenon. In the book UFOs and Abductions, he writes this: "These people, when I examined them, appeared to be of sound mind, had appropriate emotional responses and self-doubt with regard to what they were relating, and had no apparent motive for concocting such stories, were not in contact with each other, and, at least in the first years, were providing details that had never, as well as one could ascertain, been reported to the media. Finally, the accounts were eerily similar from one person to another, allowing for differences of personality, style, and talking about the experiences. In short, these individuals were talking the way people talk about something that has actually happened to them in the real world. I detected none of the imaginative strangeness and inconsistency of dreams, the idiosyncratic quality of personal fantasy, or the accompanying distortions of thinking or functional impairment that accompany various psychoses." One of Mack's clients in the book Abduction, who goes by the name of Sheila, came to John Mack to actually debunk her abductions, but instead found this. In Sheila's case, the emergence of her, quote, electrical dreams and other features of a traumatic condition following her mother's death created a certain logic that argued for an explanation of her case on the basis of unresolved grief, depression, or a post-traumatic stress disorder related to the death of her mother, to whom she had been in fact close. Yet various therapeutic efforts that followed this direction failed to relieve Sheila's distress, and by the end of the summer 1992, she had become increasingly desperate. Finally, Mack writes, "The dilemma I faced was this. While from a clinical standpoint, these reports sounded like occurrences in the real world, my worldview at the time simply discounted the existence of such things. The choice then was to persist in trying to find a conventional explanation for the phenomenon, forcing it into molds that it seemed not to fit, or to consider the possibility that my worldview was incomplete." What John Mack was able to do with his clients was help them confront their abduction experiences instead of holding them in for fear of being judged or thought to be crazy. And when he did so, he found that these people were able to grow and at times overcome their trauma. To me, that doesn't sound like a grifter or someone who just wants attention or money. That sounds like a real case of PTSD that needs to be talked about and worked on with a mental health professional.
You know, I used to think that the three-letter term "I love you" was the most powerful term in human language, and I still think it probably is. But second to that, or maybe before that, is "I believe you," because I can believe you without loving you, right? And so in these situations where you have a horrible disease that is mysterious and we haven't been able to diagnose it, or you have this experience that doesn't fall into our categories, our nice little, cups of bins to put things in. This is really, really important in dealing with this on a compassionate basis.
John Mack noticed a host of bizarre features of the alien abduction phenomenon that I think are important to highlight. One of those is the screen memory. Many experiencers will have fuzzy memories of an owl peeking through their window at night, or a deer, or other nocturnal animals that have huge black eyes, like the stereotypical gray alien. These screen memories are a real thing. And the definition is memories that are distorted or substituted to protect the individual from a more distressing truth. And to me, the most fascinating part of the abduction phenomenon is the connection to spirituality. Many experiencers feel their lives change deeply, spiritually, and there are even researchers out there like Diana Pasulka or Jacques Vallée who have done an incredible job looking back at historical events that fit the bill almost perfectly with alien abductions or close encounters with non-human intelligence. And the question is, if what we're seeing is changing over time, or if we're interpreting it differently based on our beliefs. We may never know the intent of the beings behind the abductions, but Dr. John Blitch has a chilling thesis on the intent behind the cover-up.
They were trying to protect us by reverse engineering whatever crashed vehicles they could find so that they could craft together some sort of weapon to be able to protect us from these abductors. And I'm absolutely convinced that the vast majority of them are not abductors. But it only takes a few.
His upcoming book, The Abduction Amnesty Not, focuses on abductions as the missing link to understanding the secrecy. That those in charge at the time of Roswell and other events where UFOs either crashed or landed may have seen signs of abductions. And the very thought of not being able to protect your own people is horrifying and traumatic.
This notion of having somebody with enough courage to say, look, folks, for 80 years, we have not been able to prevent these abductions from happening. But now, thanks to the $3,000 toilet seats that we've been charging you, we have been able to reverse engineer some of this technology, and we think we can do a much better job. It's not 100%, we can't catch all the criminals, but as your global law enforcement police force, we can get a good chunk of them.
The thing that clicked in my head when I was listening to Dr. Blitch is that the cover-up lines up perfectly with how the stoic soldier behaved at the time. PTSD was shell shock, and very few veterans would ever want to talk about the horrors that affected them. Instead, they kept them locked away deep inside. We know that a lot of what the government covers up is information that would embarrass them. And what could be more embarrassing than, sorry, the Defense Department on all of its trillions of dollars couldn't protect you. What's so sad is the treatment of abductees in the military. They're threatened, separated, and left by themselves to deal with their trauma. Not only should that end when it comes to abductions, but all other areas in our world where suppression and toxicity festers.
This compartmented, divisive, divide and conquer process that people rise to power with, bad juju. And it will eventually lead to your downfall. If wherever you sit on that pile, if you're leading through terror, if you're out front via terror or squashing others or dividing them and separating them and individually oppressing them, that's going to lead to your demise. I'm speaking to you, members of the cabal. You better flip it, because it is harming you. You're harming yourself by that kind of behavior.
But on the bright side, just as the cover-up is analogous to the suppression of trauma, our current era of disclosure is analogous to the opposite. In our modern day, we see so many people coming on podcasts and TV shows and letting themselves be vulnerable. And when they do that, we see how much respect they get from the public. People are willing to talk about their feelings more openly now, and it reverberates healing throughout the cosmos. And even Dr. John Blitch talks about what a real leader should do in a time like this.
So part of leadership, this is way different than management. Leadership, two critical components of that is the willingness to accept risk on behalf of your troops and be vulnerable. And by being vulnerable, I mean you stand up in front of everybody and say, I screwed up. And you acknowledge your shortcomings and truly express contrition for them, not lip service. You acknowledge your mistake, you're contrite about it, and then those troops, next time you get in the crap sandwich, And when you turn around, they're right behind you.
So as we inch closer and closer to disclosure and we learn more about these credible abduction cases, I hope that we can learn how to treat each other better as well. Because as we heal and evolve both technologically, communally, and spiritually, then we're in a better place to treat our future brothers and sisters in the cosmos better as well. And wouldn't that be a great day to be alive?
So a very small elite group decide what is the prevailing worldview, what is the nature of reality. Now, an interesting thing is happening, though, in this culture, and Michael Zimmerman has pointed this out. With the mass media, with public education being as extensive as it is, everybody's getting kind of smart, right? People know their experiences. They know they've had experiences that don't fit the prevailing mechanistic worldview. It's really going to be an interesting thing to see when the mainstream of the culture, when this 1 or 2% elite that determines what we're supposed to think is real suddenly wakes up to the fact that it's not being bought. You know, it's going to be an interesting moment. We're getting near that moment, I think.